Hello ladies and gentlemen, again Eruannë, this miniature from HeraModels. I'm going to explain you in an easy way how to paint an OSL. If you can't understand what means OSL, basically it's create a magic light from other style, just that. So forget the zenithal light and try to represent another light, for example from a fire, from a something else, just that. So it's a search with light. In that case, if you see well this video tutorial, you will find some tricks. The first one I can give you will be you have to paint the edge highlights at the beginning with the highest light. When you want to represent an OSL, you have to think in two things. The first one, you have to create the light, this OSL light, with the most saturated light and will be your highest light. So the value of the light will be this as your ceiling. So you can paint with something higher. You can paint with white. Maybe in another video tutorial I'm going to explain you how to represent these OSLs with white color as light. But in that case, because I would like to show you an easy way to do it, I've decided to paint with this saturated green. So the first step, you have to find or choose a green, saturated green, and if you don't know if it's too saturated, your green, my first tip I can give you would be add a bit of yellow if you want to saturate it, but remember, if you add yellow will be warmer, or add a bit of blue. You will saturate this green but will be colder. So in some cases, in the next video tutorials, I'm going to explain you how I play with both colors, with different greens, with some of them colder and some of them warmer, some of them with more with more yellow, and some of them with more blue to represent that green. But in that case, at the beginning, remember, just pick one saturated green to paint the edge highlights. With this color, with this edging, you will represent the highest color on the armor. Why on the armor? Because you have to find a way to represent different materials with not exactly the same colors, but so close, so similar colors. So if you want to represent metallic, you have to play with a high contrast, something different than when you paint the cloak, when you paint other clothes. So if you compare now between the clothes and the metallic parts, you will find something different. Why? Because on the metallic I painted with the most saturated green straight, just that, because I want to start to paint with the perfect color. Then if I have to play with different colors, I'm going to move to another areas, to another colors, just to test them. But if you start with the perfect color that you want, will be easier than if you start to play with grays, with blues, something like that, because you want to represent first the metallic color. So in your mind it's like steel, so you have to play with grays and then with blues and then with greens. So this is so hard to represent. So my tip is, you want to represent the OSL, where is the OSL? Here it's on the bottom part, perfect. So you have to decide what kind of materials will reflect the light and which one will absorb the light. The clothes, do you absorb the light? Perfect. The metallic have the reflection from the light? Perfect. So on the metallic, paint the edge highlights with this pure green, and then start to build up some volumes with this color, exactly the same color. So at the beginning it's perfect. Then with the clothes, you have to think that you have to represent a frame to represent this OSL, because if you don't have a frame, then maybe it won't work. What means create a frame? You have to create a dark, very very dark, if you use black, perfect, as frame. Why? Because the light from the OSL will be easier to understand it. That means that if you use white for the clothes, then you will tint or paint with green. So never will work as light, because the highest light is on the clothes with this white. So this is the typical mistake that you usually do. So please remember, you have to create a frame around this OSL. Which color you can use? A desaturated color and darker. If it's closer to black, much better, because it will be easier to you to represent the OSL, because the main light should be the OSL, not the zenithal light. The zenithal light will be desaturated like grays, with blues, violets, with some of magenta, never with greens, because if you use greens with this OSL, I don't recommend you use exactly the same color, because it will be weird. Maybe will be confused, everything with green. So for that, I started to paint with these blues, grays with blues, to paint the light on the clothes, and then the idea will be play with some of violets, just to play with the temperature and don't play with the value, because remember, you have to create the frame as black, or more or less like black. So if you play with something colder at the beginning and then something warmer, just with this magenta inside of the blue, this violet will be perfect. But if you start to play with more value of light, could be difficult to control it, because if you can't make or decide your ceiling, then you will paint with colors with more light than the OSL. And remember, the green in that case should be the highest light and the most saturated light. So this is maybe the most important trick. For that reason, I played with everything as background with blacks, black color to everything. Or if you want to mix this black with violets, with blues, maybe with another green, it's perfect. But remember, you have to paint with your first shadow on that case. And your first shadow in that case should be darker than usually explained you. So if you don't know how to start to paint, another tip I can give you is just paint with two colors, with the airbrush or with your brush. This is up to you. One color to represent the OSL at the beginning, a green in that case, the most saturated green, and the other color to everything, to every material, everything, just black, just that, okay? If you feel that you can paint with something harder, just play with different colors, but all of them desaturated and close to black. So no darker, close to black, because will be perfect to represent this frame between the OSL and the rest of the materials. And then when you have this, it's the moment to use your brush and start to create these lights. For example, if you see this cloth now, you will see that I've played with different color, more like bluish, turquoise, more like turquoise. So it's different green, but with more blue. It's perfect example that you can play with greens, but be careful, because I didn't use on the ambient light. So from the ambient, I'm going to use blues, desaturated blues, just that. But for the rest of the materials, I'm going to play with greens to represent the ambient from this OSL, turquoise, greens with more blues and more greens, more yellows, just that. And I'm going to use this kind of violet, because I have a bit of magenta inside of the color, in areas where I won't use or blend green at the end. Because another typical mistake is desaturate the light from the OSL. That means that you start to paint with airbrush, for example, and everything looks awesome. Then you paint with the brush and looks more or less okay. And then when you have done everything with the brush, looks like you have a lot of colors, different colors, but looks nice. But you forgot that you will blend over everything or over a lot of stuff with the green color. So maybe you used red color on the cloth. The clothes have magenta or red, for example, and then you will blend with green. So this red will change to a desaturated red. So you will dirt the light. So I don't like this. The light should be clean, completely clean, super saturated, just that. So if you want to represent other materials with different colors than this, I recommend you think that you never will use the complementary color or a color close to the complementary. That means that you shouldn't use orange, magenta, red, maybe violet. But violet is close to blue. So if in some moments I don't like it, it's just tinted with blue and it's perfect. Or with this black, because I want to represent this blue or violet as frame as this green. So it's perfect to create more contrast. Just that. Usually when you paint OSL, you want to represent everything with his own color. That means the skin should be brown, the armor should be gray, the wood from this weapon should be brown too. So this is wrong. You have to paint the OSL on everything, and then the other light or the other colors should be easier to control them with this OSL. And if all of them are desaturated and with a color close to this green or easy to control, it will be easier to you than if you start to paint everything with a lot of colors, because you lose the information from this OSL. Now the main light should be the OSL. So if you create different colors to represent every stuff, at the end maybe the main light is the zenithal light or the ambiental light. And for example, with this paper, the I don't know, the paper have this model here, just with the edge highlights at the beginning, it's perfect. And if you see how I use my brush, I'm painting with the tip of my brush with a low pressure to create a thin line, a super thin line. And then on the bottom of these wrinkles, I add more layers to create a thick edging to create the volumes, as you see. And this is just the first one, because then I'm going to add another light. And you will see the difference. That don't worry about the light, just paint. If you don't like it at the end, just blend with airbrush or with your brush. It's easy to fix it when you have light, because you have information. If you don't have it, then won't be possible to create with the airbrush. As you see, another light as edge highlight. But in that case, I didn't paint everything. It's just some dots to create the volume. And as you see, more definition, sharper. You can see now how I make the mixes to create this desaturated color. And now this is, I think, is really interesting to you because you have belts, wraps on a lot of models. So this is a way to represent all of them. You can represent all of these materials on the same way. But then at the end, you have to create some differences on them. In that case, when I represent leather, I like to represent it with texture. Why? Just because I like it, just that. But if you don't like it, you can start with this texture at the beginning, but then the idea will be blend with the inks on that. So you can remove everything, you can melt everything and don't have this texture. And you have the other option. Start without texture, and then if you feel that you need something else, you can create these dots, scratches to add the texture. But all of this before the ink, because after you use the inks, you will have flat texture, will be flatter with a low contrast. So it's perfect to add more and more texture. If you want something else, you can add more texture at the end. If you add the texture at the end of the inks, at the end of painted with inks, then maybe the result will look more artificial. It's like every scratch have the same depth, the same contrast, everything the same. So to fix that idea, I recommend you create the texture before to paint with the inks, and then, because you will have different color, different nuances, the idea is again add texture on some places, but just some dots on some scratches, just that. And you will have different colors, different scratches, different dots. At the end, different information will look more natural. And a tip to represent this kind of belts, the idea will be paint from the middle to the bottom with the first layer and the edging on the top. And then again start to work in the area where you played with this light, going down, going to the bottom to create the gradient, because you need to create like a curve, like a letter C. And it's an idea to represent the volume on these belts. After this, you can start to play with the inks and everything that you like. As you see, painting with the edge highlights, you can create everything. This is the most important stuff on a model. And this is the last part of this video tutorial, and I think is the key. Remember that I explained you that the main light should be the OSL. In that case, with this green color. For sure, you can play with different tones inside of the flame or inside of these OSLs, because I played with an OSL on her hand, another on the bottom, on the base, another on her eyes. But in that case, I'm painting or making another light, completely different from the ambient. So in that case, you have to play with a desaturated light, because the most saturated should be the green color. So then the highest contrast or the highest light, the ceiling of the light should stay in the green color. So this one, this ambiental light, should be desaturated and with lower contrast, just to define every stuff, just that. And don't think about every material with different colors. In that case, it's more interesting to have like a gray background to everything, to give more, to say that the OSL is more important than the rest of the materials. So in that case, I play with these blues just to create a contrast between the temperature between this green and this blue, to create more contrast, and with low contrast in that light than the other one. And if you see, maybe in some moments I'm going to blend between both lights with this OSL, but in some areas, tiny. But if you see, you will find a black lining between these two colors, these two lights. Will be perfect to create a frame to represent the OSL between the ambiental light. So this was everything on this video tutorial. I hope you have enjoyed watching this, and see you in the next one, because this project I think will be awesome. Bye bye.